Well, I had been working mostly on remote peripheries. And in those specific areas, I look at nature conservation and nature-based tourism. And I always try to include the social ecological perspective. Because of my background, I have a background in biology and ecology. And then I switched to social sciences. And nowadays I'm in the geography department. So I have been building upon my original background, so to say. So I always try to include the more ecological side of different dimensions of tourism and nature conservation. This definition we wrote in the project. I mean, we post that cryotourism is the one type of tourism that takes place in or around glaciers and snow. So we are just looking at that part of the cryosphere. We are not including the permafrost for now, but since we applied and we got a project granted around cryotourism, we decided to use that concept for now. And what is relevant, that cryotourism is quite flexible in the way that it depends on the quality, so to say, and the condition of the glacier and the snow. So it's not a fixed tourist product in a way. So it's really dynamic depending on the conditions of the ice and the snow. Well, how I try to incorporate mostly drawings or illustrations whenever I have the chance to do that. It also depends on the topic, on the content of the teaching assignment. But when I think it's suitable to include a different way of either analyzing or explaining or exploring, for example, scientific articles, I try to do that because I also have, the freedom to do that in the teaching assignments. And I use that because it really allows to see how people can develop their different skills and on how to collaborate and how to communicate differently. Especially when you are working in a multicultural environment, you can use different tools to encourage different skills among people. And then, every time I have a teaching assignment, I think, how can I include this art into education? And then I try to come up with the most suitable format and format for that kind of content. So, for example, I've done qualitative assessment of ecosystem services. So instead of reading a paper and asking the students to work on a map, like or GIS, I did that just based on drawings, for example. And then I done that like 2 hours workshop. And then here in Umeå, for example, I have used illustrations to analyze scientific papers. So sometimes master students have these journal clubs, or they have to present a paper. So last time I did this, I asked students to use the illustrations as a way of storytelling and analysis of the papers. So they could identify the main characters of the story, like of the paper, the setting where the paper was taking place, and they were encouraged to illustrate that. And of course, afterwards, they have to explain the illustration with the paper. So I think that was a different way for them to explain scientific papers and to analyze them, because then you the visualization of the paper, which I think is a very powerful tool for learning, learning processes. And I did that last year, and I still remember the papers that we discussed, because I think mostly because of the illustrations that the students developed. So and I have also used illustrations with other teachers. So I was asked, for example, to give a presentation about this example that I gave. And then I thought, okay, I need to do the same with the teachers. So I asked them to participate in a flash challenge. So they were asked to draw the favorite place in northern Sweden, their favorite place in northern Sweden. So some of them were taken by surprise with the activity because the teachers were not expecting to take part of this on these more interactive ways of discussing different topics. But at the end, I mean, half of the crowd were very active and the other half were like very surprised. But at the end, I think people understood the message and they got it, like why we could use very simple methods like drawings, for example, simple method, low cost, and then you can have a very intense and powerful, I think, discussions based on art-based methods. So I think drawings is the cheapest, easiest, people are much more familiar with drawings, but then you can build on that. I mean, you can go for much more elaborated way of develop or introduce art into teaching. But I think for now, drawings have worked quite nicely, I think, in the setting that I have been doing that. Where I think they are similar is in this imaginary dimension of the far-off lands and the adventure, outdoors, wilderness, and rugged terrain. I think that's the main, and also the imaginary drives nature-based tourism. I think that imaginary of far-off lands and wilderness, I would say, is a similar point. Then, if you want to look at the differences, for example, the Arctic is much more complicated in terms of the geopolitical situation, for example. Whereas Patagonia is mostly, I mean, it's composed by 2 countries. So the geopolitical situation is not that complicated compared to the Arctic, obviously. I thought a lot about that. And I think, yeah, it's this imaginary dimension of far away, far off lands, adventure, really a place that people imagine and dream sometimes. Some people dream about, trekking along those areas. Well, that's a very powerful tool. I mean, from the marketing point of view and from the historical point of view. So tourism has grown a lot, I think, in these areas, and especially in the remote areas with much more prominent nature. Also, the role of nature conservation playing a big role in these areas. So, for example, in Patagonia, you have nature conservation and nature-based tourism that go like really in parallel, and that has really reframed and rebranded Patagonia, for example. Patagonia is not a pristine environment. Many would disagree with me, but it's not a pristine environment. It's not untouched by the humans. It's not. It's been used, the landscape, like a cultural landscape, has been used for centuries. But with the new, I think, development and strong influence of nature conservation, these areas are being renewed, are being rebranded, so to say, for conservation, for nature and adventure. And I have one of my publications also addresses that not only me, but many authors have written about how these new meanings about nature are somehow neglecting or forgetting the human presence. And I'm not sure how does the same issue play out in the Arctic, but at least in Patagonia is a big influence from nature conservation organizations to work along with nature-based tourism. And there are benefits, of course. I mean, people are benefiting from that interaction, but at the same time, it's really rebranding a landscape that people have been used for centuries. So yeah, on a local level, you might find some conflicts between the locals and nature conservation initiatives. But at the same time, you find synergies when people try to develop nature-based tourism. And also the image is very powerful. You know, it's very, they evoke sentiments and feelings of people that you want to go there because other people did that. One thing though, that in remote areas, I think your fitness level also plays a role in terms of tourism and the imaginary, because not all the places are suitable depending on your fitness and your skills. I mean, it requires some mountaineering skills in some areas. So I think tour operators also look for a way to diversify the offer, which is you need to offer an adventure that is for the family, for the well-trained people, and for the average, you know. So I think that's also what tour operators do in some places, to try to cater for different publics, because it's not everything about, you know, Shackleton in Antarctica or these biggest explorers, like famous explorers, because not everyone can do the same. The recent project that I have is this project about cryotourism, funded by the Swedish Foundation for International Cooperation in Research and Higher Education, STINT in Swedish. So that is a small project, initiation grant that allow us to visit Chile and Argentina. So a colleague of mine came to Chile. So we did 18 days research mission, visiting our local partners in Chile and Argentina to discuss topics around cryotourism, so snow-based tourism and glacier-based tourism. So it was really nice to discuss this with the glaciologist, ecologist, sociologist, or political scientist, more in the social sciences, because it's a really complex and topic when it comes to glacier-based tourism and snow-based. Because first of all, you really need the glaciologist. I mean, you can't do this without glaciologist, in the sense that you need facts and information about the structure and the dynamic of the glaciers, for example, to be able to think about tourism. And then you also need to understand the local tourism policy, how it works, how decision-making works. Glaciers are very unstable, so you need to bring a lot of people to discuss about this. So I found it really, really interesting. And my colleague, Cenk Demiroglu, he's more focused, I mean, he's focused on snow-based tourism. So we share this interest. So we hope with that project to be able to come up with a brief communication or short communication in a journal to discuss these topics, because we also want to bring in the global perspective. For example, if we look at ski tourism, there is a group of, even though this is a small group of people that do ski tourism overall, some of them might, especially in Europe, or in China as well, they might choose to go to the southern hemisphere to seek for better snow, and that might really trigger, you know, this global change in terms of ski tourism, including very high carbon emissions to do that. So there is a huge trade-off in ski tourism industry, especially because now the Alps are running out of snow. The snowmaking, to make snow, you also need low temperatures, and it's very energy demanding, etc. My colleague will look at more the future of ski tourism, because in the south, I mean, glaciers and snow, of course, are retreating, but some places are still having quite a lot of snow, and they are attractive even for the teams. I mean, for the national teams to train there. Just an anecdote. Once I ran into the Norwegian snowboard team in Santiago, and they were going for training in Santiago. So to train there. So yeah, I mean, we are, as I said, we hope to discuss now. We need to work with our partners to discuss what we want to convey in this short communication about glacier and snow tourism from a northern perspective. That's the idea. my postdoc project is about the imaginaries of nature-based tourism in remote peripheries. So last year I conducted data collection in Abisko in northern Sweden. So I was interviewing tourists I was asking them whether they have really imagined or not tourism in the peripheries after the pandemic. So I was whether they were more motivated to visit these places after the pandemic, whether they were first time, like beginners, hiking in northern Sweden. So yeah, I think I interviewed around 40 people. For now, I haven't worked on that because as a postdoc, we are supposed to work on other things and apply for grants, etc. So, but that's in my agenda now. And then I also conducted data collection before my colleague came in January to Chile. So I visited a small village in Patagonia, which is the southernmost village along the Carretera Austral, which is the only road that connects that area. So I spent almost a month there, interviewing local tour operators and local actors about glacier tourism, because that municipality and that region, that province, they have a slogan that they are the capital of the glaciers in Patagonia. So I was wondering to what extent is that true or not? And then it's true in the sense that they are at the bottom of the ice field, so these large ice areas in the southern hemisphere. But then when it comes to tourism, some of the tourist offer is getting, I mean, it's not that easy to reach the glaciers. And when you need to take a boat, like navigate along these glacier lakes, the navigation is also getting very, very difficult. And the water, I mean, the wind are very strong there. Winds are very strong. So from the point of view of the tourist experience, not every time I mean, it could be sometimes that it's really bad experience, so to say, because of the navigation, windy conditions and rough lake. But then the glaciers are huge. I mean, you can see like huge glacier there, but yeah, the tourist part is not always, I think in that case, it might not always play a big role. And then in that place, you can also reach glaciers that are up in the mountain. But to be able to do that, you need to hike up like in a very steep slope for 5 or 6 hours. So it's a very small market still, the glacier tourism in that part, but I think there is a huge potential there. So yeah, I was interested in to know whether this municipality is thinking about the future, not only the municipality, but the local actors involved in tourism, whether they were interested in developing this potential glacier tourism, how they perceive climate change in these small municipalities, and how they think the tourist experience takes place. I mean, what they think about that. So I did that in December. So I need to work on that as well. And then my colleague joined for the cryotourism project in January. And then, yeah, we also, about that project, what I think is very interesting is to include different type of glacier tourism and snow tourism. So what we tried was to include case study visits in different geographic settings and altitudes. Because yeah, when it comes to snow, we also need to look at the altitude, not only the latitude, but the altitude. So our first case study was very close to Santiago, a ski resort that is an hour and a half, I think, from the place that we were in Santiago, 1 hour and a half drive. And then we visited, it could be considered as a high mountain ski resort at 3,000 meters above sea level. In Santiago, that's still fine, and then we visited glaciers that are easy access, and then another glacier in Patagonia that you need to access by boat. And then the most accessible glacier that I think I've seen so far, which is in Argentina. It's called the Perito Moreno Glacier. that is accessible for everyone. You just can walk, and they have footbridges, so it's really easy terrain, even accessible for wheelchairs, for example. And then when we visited Ushuaia in Argentina, we visited the glacier that is in the back of the city. It's like a couple of, yeah, it takes 20 minutes to get to the bottom by car. And then we hiked up. But then it's also a glacier that is disappearing almost. I mean, it's on the mountain, so you can see like a patch of. So what we also aim to show is these different phases of glacier and snow tourism. Because each one has a different story to tell. And I learned that from a glaciologist that we met in Patagonia, and he said, yeah, each glacier, for example, is a different story. There are some comparable things, of course, but when it comes to the use by people, by humans, in terms of tourism, it's really case by case that you have to look at. What kind of tour you can offer, what kind of safety the tour operators can offer depending on the structure of the glacier. So I find that very nice. I mean, it's very interesting to study and to understand how tourism can be developed in those areas.